This is the most mind-blowing creepy story I've ever read. It combines fantasy, supernatural, parallel universes, and mystery all in one. And after reading it carefully 5 times, I can't still figure it out and even wanted to take an IQ test. There are so many details and foreshadowing in this story, so everyone, please pay close attention to as you listen. I heartily welcome you all to share your interpretations in the comments. And if you like this story, please like or subscribe to my channel for more real Asian horror stories every Saturday night. When I was little, I used to get pneumonia all the time and would end up hospitalized every winter. I was in and out of the hospital so often that all the doctors and nurses in the pediatric ward knew me. But before the story, let me describe the layout of the hospital ward. There were 4 rooms in total, 2 face south and 2 face north, with a hallway running between them. When I walked out of my room, the nurse station was immediately to the right. It was the only one on that floor. At the other end of the hallway, there was the only bathroom on that level. Each patient room had 10 beds, arranged in 2 rows. Every room had 1 or 2 empty beds, and there happened to be an empty bed right next to me. From what I remember, all the nurses really liked me. They often gave me colorful oil candy wrappers and taught me how to fold them into paper cranes and little boats. Then they would tie them up and hang them beside my bed, saying this could bring me luck so I could get better soon. But there was one nurse who never talked to anyone and didn't pay much attention to me. I can still picture her face clearly when I close my eyes. Slender eyes, faint eyebrows, and thin lips that were always pursed shut. Her complexion was very pale, always wearing a cold face. I was actually really scared of her, because whenever she came into the room, I always felt like she wasn't alone, especially when her eyes would scan the room and land on me. I had the sense that another pair of eyes was staring at me from somewhere behind her. Every night we had rounds. When the cold-faced nurse came in, she would always tap the bed rail twice with her pen, making a rhythmic ding-ding sound to indicate we should go to bed. And after she left, we would often sneak over to play with kids from other rooms. Sometimes we would even secretly swap beds to sleep in at night. But most of the time, we wouldn't discuss the swap ahead of time, so halfway through the night, you'd feel someone tugging at your clothes and you know another kid wanted to trade beds. That night was the same as usual. After rounds, the cold-faced nurse left and we turned the lights off at 10 p.m. sharp. The only difference was that after the nurse had gone, I noticed the empty bed right next to me now had a blanket on it. But no one was sleeping there, so why was there a blanket? But I didn't think much of it at the time and just lay down to sleep. Around midnight, I suddenly woke up, blankly staring at the ceiling, listening to a kid grinding his teeth across from me, watching the shadow of trees outside moving across the curtain. The atmosphere was eerily quiet. As I was spacing out, there was suddenly a ding-ding sound from the railing of the bed next to me. I instinctively assumed it was a cold-faced nurse doing rounds again and quickly turned to look. But there was nothing and the door remained tightly shut. I was certain I hadn't imagined it, because at the same time, some other kids turned over in their beds and the teeth grinding stopped too. The sound must disturb them in a way. Watching for a while and seeing nothing unusual, I flipped over to continue spacing out. A few minutes later, the railing of the empty bed made another hollowing ding-ding, identical to the sound of the nurse tapping it. This time, I was positive I hadn't misheard. I bolted up and peered toward the door, but there was still nothing there. This phenomenon repeated 3 or 4 times. I started feeling uneasy, forcing myself not to look and pretending not to hear it. But after a while, I felt a hand tugging at my blanket. It dawned on me that someone wanted to switch beds with me, but I didn't feel like getting up, so I pretended to sleep soundly. The hand tugged for a while, then stopped. A few minutes later, I heard the teeth-grinding kids from the bed across getting up. For convenience, let's call him Grindy. From the glimpse, I saw someone was indeed changing bed with him. They were all quiet about it. But then, Grindy didn't go to another room. Instead, he walked toward the empty bed beside me, then climbed up the bed and covered the blanket. Although I usually saw kids changing beds at midnight, but this is different. There's a kind of nervousness I can tell that made my hands sweaty. However, at that moment, the kid across from me started grinding the teeth again. I took a careful listen and it was definitely coming from that bed. But hadn't the kid been moved to the bed next to me? So who was in the bed across from me? I lied on bed stiffly, then stilled my nerves and turned to look at the bed next to me. It was empty. That's impossible. I had clearly seen the whole process happen. It couldn't have been a dream or hallucination. I was drenched in nervous sweat and spent the entire night wide awake. The next time I heard the familiar ding-ding sound was the next morning. I sat up gradually and the cold-faced nurse was standing in the middle of the room writing something in her notebook. The bed to my right was still empty, and the blanket was gone without a trace, as if it had never been there. Grindy was still sleeping, but had stopped grinding. Looking at the nurse, I still felt there was a pair of eyes behind her staring at me, sending chills down my spine. After taking our temperatures in the morning, I told Dodo, the kid sleeping next to Grindy, about what happened last night. Dodo said he had also heard the pin tapping the bed railing, but he had been half asleep and unaware of anything switch beds with Grindy, so I plucked up my courage and went to ask Grindy directly. Grindy was a boy around my age who also had pneumonia. Usually he was very mischievous, running around coughing severely during activity times. He didn't seem sick at all. But that day he was very unlike himself, staying in bed curled up in his blanket, looking glum. I asked if he had switched beds with anyone last night and also slept in the empty bed beside me. He showed a very puzzled look and said he couldn't remember clearly. It felt like maybe he had, but couldn't recall with whom. I remember the kid from the other pediatric room loved switching beds most, then I went to ask him too. But he said his mom had picked him up to stay home for the night and he had just come back this morning. Now I was thoroughly confused, but something told me this would happen again. As expected, around midnight tonight, I clearly heard the two dinging sounds again, followed by a hand tugging at my blanket like the previous night. After a few fruitless tugs, it stopped. What happened next was like deja vu. Grandy's bed had two people getting on and off again to switch places. Then that dark shadow slowly moved toward the empty bed beside me. But this time, I don't know where I got the courage. I suddenly sat up in bed and looked straight at the shadow. It seemed to realize I was watching it and stopped moving, standing motionless not far from me. Our beds all had the emergency light that the nurse said we could only turn on for life or death situations, otherwise it would disrupt others' rests. So I reached out and switched mine on. The room instantly lit up, but there was nothing in front of me. No shadow, no person. I hurriedly ran to check on Grandy. His whole body was bundled under the blanket with not even his head sticking out. I shook him, but he didn't move at all. Feeling something was off, I yanked his blanket open. The instant I put it back, a strange smell rushed at me. I can't describe it, but the thought that flashed through my mind was, this is the smell of someone about to die. Granny's face had turned Asian, with purple lips, eyes and mouth freakishly wide open in an expression of sheer terror. He seemed to be suffocating, unable to speak a word or even breathe. I was scared out of my wits and immediately started crying as I ran toward the door shouting for the nurse. The hallway was pitch black. Relying on memory, I turned right. I should be at the nurse station after a couple steps. I pushed the door open and rushed in, but something was different. The room was dark and hollow, with the sound of running water. There was a damp, fishy smell in the air, and the floor seemed to be tiled. I suddenly realized this wasn't the nurse station at all, but the bathroom at the other end of the hall. Let's look at the floor plan again. Coming out of my room, the nurse station was just a right turn. I had walked it countless times and knew it like the back of my hand. No matter how panicked, there's no way I could have gone to the bathroom so far away at the other end. I quickly backed out of the bathroom and turned to run down the hallway in the other direction. If I had gone the wrong way just now, then the nurse station must be at the other end. I sprinted until reaching the other end of the hall, but when I rushed in, it was still a bathroom, just different from the one before. While the previous one had felt like I had never been there, this one did feel like the bathroom I used every day. I leaped out as if shocked by electricity, retreating back into the hallway again. I didn't dare enter any room now, only able to stand in the hallway shouting, "Nurse! Nurse! Someone is dying!" Just then, I heard a door open from the other end of the hall, and a nurse yelled, "What's happening?" I cried out, "Someone in room 4 is dying!" I saw her turn left into one of the rooms, which I assumed must be my room 4, so I hurried over. But I had barely taken 2 steps when I suddenly realized the room 4 was right next to me. Because I had turned on the emergency light when I got up, so only room 4 should be lit up. I didn't dare go any further then and went back to the room right next to me. All the kids in the room now were awake because of my shouting. Dodo was already standing by Grandy's bed looking at him, while he had closed his mouth again and resumed breathing, but his eyes were still wide open in terror. Just then, an older kid also went out to find the nurse. He didn't seem to encounter what I had, because the nurse came in shortly after. She walked straight to Grindy to feel his forehead and pulse, frowning slightly as he muttered, "How is he running a fever again now?" Then she told us, "It's fine now, all of you go back to sleep." Still shaken, I crawled back into my own bed, my feet ice cold. Lying there stiffly, I watched the nurse leave and come back to give Grindy a shot to reduce his fever before turning off the lights and leaving. Her footsteps went right, then I heard the door close. Now there's no way I could fall asleep. The smell, sounds, and sense of disorientation from ending up in that unfamiliar bathroom, I just couldn't make sense of it all. Also, who was that person who came from the other end of the hall, and which one was really room 4? And who was that kid trying to switch beds? All these questions kept swirling in my mind. I was woken up again by the nurse yelling, "Time to get up." The sun was up once more. After 2 consecutive nights of poor sleep, my whole body felt weak and listless. During morning rounds, the nurse touched my head and asked if anything felt uncomfortable. I really wanted to tell her everything that happened the past 2 nights, but was scared she'd think I was lying. So after hesitating, I just said I hadn't rested well. Granny was still unable to get out of bed, much more severely ill than before. After taking my morning meds, I pulled Dodo out to the hallway to wander around and see why I had gotten turned around last night. As expected, the bathroom was still the bathroom, the nurse station still the nurse station. With several nurses around, it was actually quite lively, nothing like the creepy vibe the night before. Around noon, 2 doctors came, one of whom seemed to be a very prestigious expert. Grandy's parents also came too, but they didn't appear too concerned. As the doctors advised them to get the child checked for various things, they simply kept nodding and answered perfunctorily. "If the fever doesn't break soon, the child's life will be in danger," I heard the doctor say. Grandy now was like a lifeless husk, not just endless coughing, but unable to even get up. The 3 nurses were busy giving him ice baths to lower his temperature. "Observe for 1 more hour. If no change, move him to the ICU," the doctor told the nurse in the end. Luckily, Grandy's fever gradually declined and his breathing, loudly asthmatic breathing became much calmer. We all relaxed a bit. The doctor added some IV drips and exhorted the parents to visit more often, saying kids left alone in the hospital for too long could get depressed and negatively impact their condition psychologically. Grandy's parents really didn't come to see him much and would scold him when they did visit. I remember once they brought him a box of malt milk powder, mixed a glass for him to drink. Probably because of the medicine, he instantly threw it all up after taking a sip. His dad immediately slapped him, scaring the other kids. Thankfully, a nurse was present to intervene, otherwise it looked like more slaps would follow based on his stance. And shortly after, with his fever down, the parents left again, abandoning their kid alone in bed. Dodo and I played nearby, trying to cheer him up. He would smile but was still listless and weak. Perhaps because I was afraid of the night, the days seemed to fly by unusually quickly. Soon, night came closed the hospital again. The nurse on that night duty was an older one. After she did the roll call, lights were promptly out at 10 p.m. As soon as it switched off, I immediately felt my breathing tensed up as I instinctively glanced at Grandy's bed. He was lying there quietly. I then looked at the empty bed right next to me, still empty as usual. But I suddenly noticed the name card hanging by the headboard. Each of our beds had a name card put into the plastic slot. For an empty bed, the slot would be vacant. But in the darkness, I noticed there appeared to be a paper slip inside. It was just after 10 p.m., some kids not fully asleep yet, so I gathered my courage to take a look. Indeed, a stiff paper slip was inserted face down. I carefully tried to remove it to see what was written on the back, but the slip seemed stuck inside tightly. After much fiddling, it finally came loose and I gently slid it out. In the faint light coming through the window, I could make out the words, "Zhuang Wenting, acute pneumonia," and a box was drawn around the name. I remember this name very, very clearly because it was the first time I had seen the name boxed in. It felt oppressive. Who was Zhuang Wenting? Could she have occupied this bed before? I don't recall anyone sleeping here since I arrived, and oddly, whenever new kids were admitted, none were assigned to this bed. Just as I stood there puzzling over, the ding-ding sound bursted out in the air, scaring me so bad I nearly dropped the card. Wait, that's not right. It wasn't even midnight yet. Why the sounds came so early? I froze stiffly, still holding the name card, facing the wall, too afraid to turn around. I felt someone walk up behind me and lightly tug at my clothes, as if wanting to whisper something, but I still didn't dare to turn. The hand kept pulling for a very long time, seemingly aware I was awake. I couldn't help shuddering. "Why are you standing there?" Suddenly, someone spoke. It was the voice of the kid who had gone to call the nurse last night. But what did it mean? He couldn't see the person beside me? The instant he spoke, the tugging hand immediately stopped. I need to pee." I lied. He gave an okay and went back to bed. I look back now, and surprisingly, no one was there. So I clutched the name card and rushed back to my bed, hiding my head under the blanket. I kept wondering about this name card, feeling like it must be connected to the recent happening somehow. Just then, I heard the creaking sounds from Grandy's bed again. I looked over and sure enough, 2 people were switching beds exactly like the past 2 nights. They first traded beds, then the dark shadow moved very slowly toward the empty bed next to me. But that night, it stopped at the foot of the bed as if noticing something wrong. After a brief hesitation, it still climbed into the bed, lying down and forming a small mound-like shadow. Afraid it would run off, I didn't turn on the light this time. I snuck out of the bed, wanting to find the old nurse on duty. I tiptoed to the door, certain I was very alert, mentally reciting, "This is room 4, the nurse station is just to the right. This is room 4, the nurse station just to the right." With each step, I looked back at the room to confirm I wasn't going to the wrong way. It felt like an endless few steps. Just as I was about to push open the door, a voice called out, "What are you doing here?" I was startled. Quickly looking back, it was a cold-faced nurse. But it wasn't even her shift that night. At the same time, I saw a vague shadow behind her, facing toward me. I can feel it was staring at me together with the nurse. I need to pee," I said. "The bathroom is right ahead. Go pee and get back to bed quickly." She seemed normal, apart from appearing at the wrong time. The bathroom is right ahead? My mind buzzed. I had just confirmed the room's location with each step and looking back, so how could I be reversed again? I turned and saw the light from the room 4 far down the other end of the hallway. Behind me were the cold-faced nurse and that shadow watching me. "Go on then," said the nurse. I steeled myself and walked toward the bathroom ahead, not knowing what would happen. I desperately wanted to yell for help, but felt like even if I did, no one would care. It was as if I was already in another world. My legs were soft, cold all over. It was still that unfamiliar bathroom. Lights off, dripping water, the stench, chilliness. I shivered in terror, unable to make out the bathroom's layout, only feeling my way deeper inside. The further I went, the more distant the world behind felt, growing colder and more cramped. I wanted to turn and run out, but suddenly made out 2 vague small figures crouching not far away. I tried hard to say who they were without daring to step closer. "Are you here to play with me too?" One of the figures stood up, seemingly speaking to me. The other also got up, coughing twice. It was Grindy's cough. Why was he here? Shouldn't he be in bed? Not knowing how to respond, I just turned and fled. "Stay and play with me." The voice behind seemed to chase after me. I desperately sprinted for the exit, focused on just one thought. I had to get out of this bathroom, or I'd be trapped forever. I shut my eyes and rushed out the door. Just then, I heard shouting around me. "Baby, baby, wake up." It was my mom's voice calling me. I slowly opened my eyes to find myself lying in bed, surrounded by people, and it was daytime. My whole body ached, my lungs unbearably itchy, coughing non-stop. "If the fever doesn't break soon, the child's life will be in danger," said the prestigious doctor. Where had I heard this before? Didn't he say the same thing to Grindy when he had the fever yesterday? Peering through the crowd, I saw Grindy still in bed across from me. But why was Dodo sleeping on his right and an empty bed on his left? Just then, I fearfully realized I was in Grindy's bed. "She probably caught a chill from switching beds with me last night," I heard Grindy said. "Switching beds? When did I ever switch in beds with Grindy?" A feeling of time and space distortion surrounded me. I wasn't even sure if I was awake or asleep, just felt extremely exhausted. After the nurse gave me an injection, I faded into slumber. I seemed to have a very long dream, endless coughing as if about to die, throwing up a lot of blood. I also dreamed Grindy said to me, "I don't want to be discharged anymore. My parents don't like me. I might as well live in the hospital forever." When I finally awoke, it was night again. My mom was still sitting by my bedside, but I noticed her face was stained with tears. Seeing I was up, she quickly came over to stroke my head. "Mom, what's wrong?" The atmosphere in the room felt off. The kids were all silent, heads drooped, only the nurse tidying up the IVs. I sat up and saw Grandy's bed was empty. No, my bed was empty. Mom told me that while I was unconscious, Grindy had suddenly spiked a high fever that wouldn't go down, and his breathing had stopped too. The doctors tried to resuscitate him for a long time but couldn't bring him back. Just like what he said in my dream, he lived in the hospital forever. I numbly listened to my mom recount it all, numbly accept her comfort and touches, feeling nothing was real. But after Grindy died, nothing strange happened at night anymore. And when the cold-faced nurse came in, she no longer tapped the bed rails with her pen or stared at me. I kept sleeping in Grindy's former bed until I was discharged. On the day I left, my mom came to pick me up. While putting on my shoes, the cold-faced nurse suddenly smiled. "Your boy is so fun," she said to my mom, still confusing left and right foot at her age, just like my Wenting when she was little. Wenting? Zhuang Wenting. That name immediately floated into my mind, and I instinctively reached under my pillow, but found nothing. Only then did I recall I had been sleeping in Grandy's former bed, but there was no way for me to retrieve that name card. This matter then abruptly ended with my discharge. Personally, I had two explanations. The simplest first, the protagonist was dreaming and everything was imagined. But if it was a dream, then how could he predict Grandy's diagnosis from the doctor as well as Grandy's death? The second explanation is that everything was real. The cold-faced nurse was behind it all. Her daughter was Zhuang Wenting, who died from acute pneumonia, and since then, her soul attached to the nurse. That's why the protagonist felt someone else was watching him behind the nurse. After her daughter's death, the nurse wanted to revive her through a ritual to exchange life, and the knocking sounds are one of the ritual steps like a psychological cue in hypnosis. At first, the nurse intended to exchange the protagonist's life, but when he ignored the tug at night, that plan failed. Then she went on to exchange Grandy's instead, which is why Grindy suddenly developed a high fever in the afternoon, which led to his death. As for the protagonist's exchange bath with Grindy in the end, I haven't figured it out yet. So what are your thoughts on this? Well, that's all for this story. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. We'll meet again next Saturday. Bye bye.